Have you ever seen Return of the Living Dead? A movie with zombie dwarves, Linnea Quigley naked, and zombie Hitler? It all takes place July 3rd, 1984 at UNITA Medical Supply Center where Frank and Freddy are shown. These two are workers at the warehouse, but Freddy is an intern, and Frank's boss is there too for a moment before leaving about hanging out Sunday. Now we see Freddy's friends. That also consists of edgy 80s punks. There in the group is Trash, Spider, Chuck, Casey, and Scuzz, and Freddy's girlfriend Tina. They all decide to meet up with Freddy after work along with Tina as they talk about a party. Freddy is in Frank's office with them as Freddy asks the question, what's the weirdest thing he has ever saw here? Frank then says if he's ever seen the movie Night of the Living Dead, then explains that it was a real serious case, that in 1969 there was a chemical spill at the morgue and made the bodies reanimate. The chemical was 2,4,5-trioxide, which is the chemical later shown in the film. Frank then finishes by saying that they couldn't really tell the story, so they shut everything down and kept it a secret, and the bodies with the 2,4,5-trioxide were shipped at their warehouse. Frank then leads Freddy to the basement where they're stored, and tells him to watch his step. That's foreshadowing. Frank then shows the barrels to Freddy, where he wipes the glass with a whole paper towel. Freddy then asks Frank if they ever leak, and Frank says it's made by the top military engineers, then smacks the barrel's booty, and it farts out the 2,4,5-trioxide chemical, where the best title sequence shows. A little backstory on the movie, the film is described as a mordant punk comedy and is known for its popular concept of brain-eating zombies, not flesh-eating ones, which is a lot different from past illustrations. The zombies in this film also do not die with a blow to the head, so this will be interesting. Now our Colonel Glover arrives home, flashes his wife a little, and go do his duty. Freddy's friend group then gets another friend, Suicide, who is this hardcore punk dude and is also their ride, and they end up at Freddy's work. Since Freddy's not getting out of work until later tonight, they decide to hang out at the closed-off graveyard. Back at the warehouse, Freddy and Frank wake up after being intoxicated by the chemical, and they go up to the warehouse for them to see everything come alive, including half a dog thing, and they try killing it but are unsuccessful. The dog actually reacts to the hit too. They then hear the cadaver back alive in the meat locker. They decide not to call the police and call Frank's boss instead, Bert.
Bert? Frank? We have a little problem.
Trash, who is played by Linnea Quigley, then starts talking about what's the worst ways to die, and gets all pent up and starts talking about how, for her, it's about getting her clothes ripped off and getting eaten alive. Talk about a fetish. She then starts dancing on graves naked.
I dance for dead.
It cuts back to Bert yelling at Frank as the cadaver keeps making noise. They discuss how to kill the zombie, figuring that they can kill it with a blow to the head like in the movies, but as they fight the cadaver and cut his head off, they soon come to realize that it didn't work, so they have to try another method. Bert then gets the idea to visit his friend who works at a morgue.
Hey, is that Freddy?
Where?
Over there going into that building.
Nope, that is not Freddy.
How would you know?
Because why would Freddy be going into a mortuary?
Bert visits his German friend Ernie. Bert and Ernie, haha.
Hey, Ernie.
They start conversation, and Ernie tells him about rigor mortis. And Bert talks about how long they've known each other. Then Bert brings in Frank and Freddy with the limbs of the cadaver in plastic bags.
Bert, that's illegal.
And Bert tells Ernie that they are filled with rabid weasels.
You know how these things happen.
No, I don't. How do they happen?
And Ernie tells him what they can do to get rid of them. But then Bert mentions his crematorium.
Right?
You want to burn them?
Yeah, that's what I had in mind, actually.
Ernie insists to at least kill them before burning them. At this point, they can't keep hiding the body, so Bert tells Ernie if he can keep a secret, then he shows him the moving limbs. The arm grabs Ernie's leg and he flips out. They rebag the arm, then explain to him the situation. Back at the cemetery, Tina figures it's pretty much 10 p.m., so she heads over to the medical warehouse. Ernie allows for them to use his crematorium, but at the cost of him owing him something. Ernie tells them that the heart is the hardest muscle to burn, and then he burns the body, and problem solved. The smoke just peacefully goes away. Except it rains, and all the contaminated smoke rains down, and the rain goes onto the graves of dead people. The punks at the cemetery leave as it rains, and Tina makes it to Freddy's work. Meanwhile, at the morgue, Freddy and Frank explain to Bert how they feel sick, and that they absorbed the trioxide chemical, so they call an ambulance, telling the operators the two have been poisoned, but are unsure with what.
Freddy?
Now we cut back to Tina, looking for Freddy at the warehouse, and then one of the most iconic scenes comes.
Who's there?
Tar Man, who has a separate lore. She attempts to escape, but the pesky step from earlier breaks on her. She runs and hides, becoming trapped. The punks left the car that was inoperable and go to find Tina. The gang finds Tina and escape, but not without the death of suicide. He gets bitten on the head like an apple, and then he dies. Now we cut back to the paramedics working on the warehouse workers, but have difficulty running any test. Their pulse and blood pressure is gone, and the temperature is dead cold. They tell them that they should be dead, but are confused as to why they are able to speak and move.
Oh, we gotta call somebody!
Who? Hey, I don't want to call no cops. The cops are just gonna kick our ass. Just let's get out of here, okay?
Oh, we gotta call somebody!
Now it's the punk scene, where they are running away and run into the cemetery. They see the dead coming back to life.
The fuck was that?
They all run in panic, and poor Trash gets eaten by a zombie after she falls. Her worst fear comes to reality. At this point in time, our timelines collide. The rest of the group but two manage to make it to the morgue, where Ernie and his gang is at, while the other two people hide back at the warehouse, and this time, Tar Man is safely locked out. The two try calling for help, but this big bot of a zombie crashes through the window and ruins the chances for them.
Give me the police, this is an emergency!
The punks explain to Ernie about the dead coming back to life after running up to his doorstep, and tell them that they need to board up their windows and to lock up. Tina finds Freddy, while poor Frank is left alone with his wife at home with that
Pot roast. No, I'll be home in about an hour. You keep the pot roast hot, okay?
Ernie steps outside and finds the ambulance car still outside, and not long after, finds the zombie dwarf. Ernie runs in fear and goes to call for help, but the lines are dead. They start boarding up the funeral home, and Zombie Hitler calls to send more paramedics to the scene.
This is dispatch. Do you copy over?
I'm in dispatch. Send more paramedics.
Freddy and Frank are both dying due to the chemical exposure, and Bert has to explain to his friends what's happening. Eventually, the window barrier gives out and they fight back the horde outside, but one of the punks, Scuzz, ends up being bitten on the head and dies. Ernie kebabs the zombie and brings it to his morgue for questioning, like why they eat people. She then says, "It's the pain."
The pain of being dead.
Eating brains helps them not feel like they're rotting away. Now we cut back to Trash rising back from the dead as a hobo comes along and she bites him on the head like an apple. It seems to appear that only the dead that are contaminated with the trioxide chemical have come back to life, and the dead that die without contamination just die. So it's more of a likely situation than a hypothetical virus. Also, this movie is one of the first to feature talking and running zombies.
¿Pero crees que lo hagan?
Chuck, nunca me gustaste. Dios mío, abrázame.
Law enforcement has gotten involved as people now acknowledge the situation of people eating people, and they struggle to control the problem.
Send more cops.
Ernie gets the idea to hide up in the attic, away from the ground level, and brings out a jar of acid, but it's too small to really cause any damage to the mob outside.
I can finally see one thing. And one thing only that can leave this horrible suffering.
What, Freddy? What?
Alive.
Freddy now turns and attacks Tina. The gang rescues her, and Ernie uses his one shot of acid to back Freddy away, and in the background, Frank escapes. They begin to plan a move. Bert and Spider are gonna run outside to the car to go reach out for help.
Hey, man. His face is all fucked up, man, with Freddy done.
He's not Freddy.
Shut up! Nigga, shut up!
But since Ernie hurt his leg somehow, he's staying behind with Tina, and Ernie and Tina go into the attic, while Spider and Bert make a run for it to the cop's car. They manage to succeed, but Tina thinks they have abandoned them.
Lo conozco.
Nos abandonaron.
Ernie and Spider end up crashing, and they end up back at the warehouse where Casey and Chuck are at.
Por aquí, dese prisa!
Now we see the burn scene, where Frank incinerates himself and places his wedding ring on a switch. He dies in agony. But honestly, burning seems a lot worse than actually turning, so that doesn't really make any sense to me.
Children of the night. What music
Back to Bert, Spider, Casey, and Chuck. Bert says there's a phone back down in the basement, but Tarman is down there. So they have to form up to knock his head off, then rush in. Once they reach the basement, they call the police.
Ay, por ti, Tina.
When Bert starts explaining the nature of the zombies, the chief can't hear, and eventually they get overtaken and die.
¿Qué ocurre?
Bert's last resort is to call the number on the barrel where Tarman came from. It's the military, and they tell them the state of where they are and what's happening. The guy writes down some stuff and goes into his office, and then Spider asks what's happening, and Bert then explains that the military has a set plan for when this type of thing happens.
That's great.
What is this plan?
Sergeant Jefferson, 42nd Special Mobile Artillery. All right, sir. Whatever you say, sir. The code numbers, please, sir.
And they are getting ready to initiate it. Finally, we see the military putting in coordinates to launch. Then all of a sudden, they hear a whistle, and back at the morgue, Freddy manages to reach Ernie and Tina. Then a split second after, the explosion.
You hear anything?
July 4th.
Spectacular results, sir.
The blast kills about 40 million, and they say, problem solved. There may be a lot of smoke, but the rain will take care of it. But what they forgot to realize is that when the contaminated smoke rains down, the dead and the cemeteries come back to life, and the whole cycle starts again. And that's how it ends. That was Return of the Living Dead 1985. While this film reached commercial success, none of the 4 other sequels have matched up to it. But personally, I liked part 2, and that one came out 3 years later. However, this film still stands alone. Every one of the main cast members of this film is alive, except James Karen, Don Calfa, and Mark Venturini. Everyone else is in their elderly age. It's really cool seeing this film with the actors really young and seeing them now. It's like a time capsule, a glimpse into the past with 80s punks and brain-eating zombies. If you want to see more videos like this, go visit my channel and subscribe because it only takes a second.